On a humid June night in 1841, Colonel Edmund Thornhill gathered his household slaves in the grand drawing room of his Dallas County plantation and delivered an announcement that left everyone stunned. His wife, Virginia, who weighed over 400 pounds and rarely left her chair, would now be placed under the care of Silas, a dwarf slave he had purchased 3 months earlier for $400. What no one in that room knew, what would only come to light decades later through papers sealed in a Charleston vault, was that this decision was not an act of cruelty or madness. It marked the beginning of a medical experiment so horrifying that 7 people had already died in its development, funded by a secret society of wealthy Southern men known as the Society of Medical Inquiry. They believed Silas's blood held the secret to reversing disease and decay, and Colonel Thornhill was determined to prove it. Before the horrors of Thornhill Manor unfolded, make sure you're subscribed to Liturgy of Fear and tell us in the comments where you're listening from, because this story will take us deep into one of Alabama's most disturbing secrets. The events that followed that night would haunt Dallas County for generations. Colonel Thornhill had returned home 2 years earlier in 1839, his left arm crippled by a tomahawk wound from the Battle of Horseshoe Bend 25 years before. The injury never fully healed, leaving him dependent on morphine and forever marked by the brutal campaigns of Andrew Jackson. At 52, Thornhill was a rigid, cold man, his gray eyes sharp and distant. The plantation he inherited after his father-in-law's sudden death stretched across 1,800 acres of rich cotton fields along the Alabama River. Locals called the mansion Thornhill Manor, though the old deed still bore the name Ridgemont, a small detail that would later carry great significance. The 3-story Greek Revival home loomed with its tall white columns and shadowed halls where most rooms stayed locked and covered in dust. Only 2 trusted slaves were ever allowed into the deep, windowless basement, a place no one else dared to question. Dallas County in those years was a world of strict hierarchy and quiet terror. The nearby town of Cahaba, once Alabama's capital, before floods forced the move to Montgomery, had become a strange mix of faded politicians and ambitious planters, men who treated the South as their personal experiment. The enslaved outnumbered the free 3 to 1, and though cotton brought wealth, it also masked the region's darker ambitions. Virginia Thornhill, once the belle of Mobile society, had been a striking woman in her youth, but by her 40s, her body had betrayed her. What we'd now call a thyroid condition had caused her to swell to an extraordinary size, confining her to a reinforced chair in the parlor, where she read medical journals and prayed for relief. Her husband watched her not with affection, but with cold scientific interest, filling notebooks with observations as though she were a specimen. The household consisted of 19 slaves, 6 serving inside the house. Esther, the seasoned cook, her daughter Celia, Virgilia's personal attendant, the brothers Marcus and Isaiah, who helped the colonel in his nocturnal experiments, Judith, the strict housekeeper, and young Penny, a 12-year-old forbidden from ever entering the colonel's study. Into this uneasy household came Silas. Colonel Thornhill found him at a slave auction in Mobile on a heavy March morning in 1839. At just under 4 feet tall, Silas drew startled murmurs from the crowd. His frame was small but muscular, his eyes unnervingly calm. The auctioneer described him as literate, fluent in French and English, skilled in medicinal herbs, and using the phrase that made planters uneasy, experienced in certain specialized practices. His previous owner, a Dr. Beauchamp from Louisiana, had recently died under unfortunate circumstances. Thornhill's interest was immediate. For $400, he purchased Silas and began the long trip home, saying little along the way. On the second night, beneath a pale moon, he finally spoke. "Can you truly read, Silas?" The man answered in a deep, measured voice that didn't fit his size. "Yes, master." And your medical training, is it real? Dr. Beauchamp trained me for 8 years, Silas said evenly. He believed small hands were useful for delicate work. I assisted in over 200 surgeries. Thornhill studied him in silence. You're lying, he finally said. Beauchamp didn't die of yellow fever. He was poisoned with arsenic. I know because I checked the records. Silas said nothing. Something flickered in his eyes, perhaps fear, perhaps pride. Thornhill leaned closer. I don't care what happened in New Orleans. What matters is what you can do for me now. I have work that requires intelligence, precision, and absolute silence. You will assist me in my experiments. In return, you'll have your own quarters, better food, and access to my medical library. But if you ever speak of what we do, your death will be slow and inventive. Do we understand each other? Yes, Master. Good, Thornhill said, settling back. When we reach the manor, you'll meet my wife. She's dying. Conventional medicine has failed her. It's time to try something unconventional. They arrived at Thornhill Manor on a Thursday afternoon just as storm clouds gathered over the horizon, and the air shimmered with the restless charge that comes before thunder. The slaves came out to meet the wagon, their faces blank masks as they took in the stranger, small, quiet, unchained now, yet unmistakably trapped. Silas stepped down, his sharp eyes scanning the grounds, knowing full well that a man of his appearance could never escape alive through the cotton fields of Dallas County. Inside, Virgilia Thornhill waited in her grand drawing room, seated in her massive reinforced chair near a tall window that let in the cruelest light. Her silk dress shimmered deep green, its seams stretched to accommodate her enormous frame, and her hair, still glossy and dark, was piled high in a style that betrayed a stubborn trace of vanity. So this is the one, she said, her voice unexpectedly soft, almost musical. Come closer. Silas obeyed. Standing before her, he was nearly eye level despite her seated position. She took his chin between her fingers and turned his head, inspecting him as if he were livestock. Edmund tells me you have medical knowledge. Yes, mistress. And breeding capability? 17 children, I hear. All healthy. So I've been told, he replied evenly. Most were sold at birth. A flicker crossed her face, pity or perhaps recognition. Of course, that's the way of things here. But we're not interested in children, Silas. Our aims are higher. My husband, I assume, told you nothing. No, mistress. Typical Edmund. He does love his secrets. She sighed, the sound turning ragged. I am dying, Silas. This body grows heavier and weaker every month. The doctors offer leeches and prayers, but I no longer believe in either. My husband and I are seeking other methods. Older knowledge, forbidden ones. Colonel Thornhill appeared then, his boots hard on the floorboards. That's enough, Virgilia. He'll see his quarters and begin work tomorrow. She smiled, her lips trembling. Theory, Edmund. Is that what we're calling it now? Her laugh turned into a cough that rattled her chest. Thornhill's expression tightened. Celia, show him his room. Silas, breakfast at 6 sharp. Dismissed. As Silas followed the maid out, Virgilia's voice carried faintly behind him. He's perfect, Edmund. Exactly what we need. Soon, my dear, the colonel replied. Very soon. The small room off the kitchen had once been a pantry. It held a cot, a table, a narrow window overlooking the garden, and a lock on the inside, something no other slave possessed. At night, Silas would lie awake, listening to the noises that drifted from the basement below, footsteps, murmured voices, and sometimes sounds that didn't seem human. His duties began simply recording Virgilia's symptoms in the colonel's study, a dim room lined with books on anatomy, alchemy, and natural philosophy. Each morning he weighed her, noted her pulse, tracked her breathing, and copied his master's meticulous notes. But there were other notebooks, two older ones, stained dark and smelling faintly of iron. The sketches inside, glimpsed only for moments, revealed bodies cut open with precision no textbook could teach. One morning, Thornhill caught Silas glancing at them. "Curious, are you?" he said. "Good. Curiosity means intelligence. But understand this medicine as it stands is primitive. Bloodletting prayer, superstition. The ancients were wiser. They knew that knowledge demands sacrifice. In Charleston before the war, I studied under Dr. Nathaniel Rutledge. He believed life itself could be measured, transferred, controlled. The body, Silas, is merely a vessel." Silas kept his face neutral. "Transfer life, master." "Precisely," Thornhill said, eyes bright with a terrible certainty. "Some thrive while others waste away. That is not God's will. It is nature's law. And laws can be rewritten." When Silas was finally brought into the basement laboratory, he saw the full scale of the colonel's obsession. The space was vast and unnaturally clean. Its stone walls lined with cabinets of gleaming steel tools, glass jars filled with preserved organs, and hand-drawn charts of the human form. Strange brass machines stood in the corners, connected by tubes and leather straps. It smelled of alcohol and metal, and something faintly sweet, like rot, disguised as science. "We begin with simple measurements," Thornhill said. "Both subjects must be observed before any transfer can occur." "Both?" Silas asked carefully. The colonel smiled thinly. "You didn't think this was only about my wife, did you? She will receive. You, my friend, will give." Silas felt his pulse quicken, but his voice stayed calm. "You mean to kill me? Kill you?" "No, that would defeat the purpose. The process is meant to be reciprocal. You'll feel weak, yes, but you'll recover. If it works, we'll repeat it. If not, well, every failure teaches us something. Science demands perseverance." The words chilled Silas more than any threat could. He understood then what Thornhill hadn't said. The failures before him the other dwarfs rumored to vanish from auction records across the deep south were not accidents. They were experiments. That night, lying awake in his narrow bed, Silas made his choice. He would cooperate, learn, and wait. He had survived Dr. Beauchamp's medical research in New Orleans and ensured that Beauchamp's final drink had been his last. He would survive this too. But as he listened to the heavy footsteps descending into the basement and heard Virgilia's labored breathing echo through the manor, he wondered how many others across the South were caught in similar nightmares. The experiments were about to begin, and what awaited beneath Thornhill Manor would make every sin before it seemed merciful. 3 weeks later, as the magnolia scent thickened in the air, a black carriage rolled up the oak-lined drive. Dr. Constance Rutledge had arrived. At 57, Dr. Constance Rutledge cut an eerie figure, tall, skeletal, his beard almost white, and eyes so pale they seemed drained of color. He carried himself like a man, accustomed to obedience, and every slave in Thornhill Manor instinctively lowered their gaze when he passed. From the kitchen window, Silas watched as Marcus and Isaiah unloaded heavy wooden crates from Rutledge's carriage. The boxes bore no markings, but their weight and the way the men carried them carefully, reverently told Silas everything he needed to know. They were bound for the basement. "That's the devil himself," Esther muttered beside him as she chopped vegetables, her voice low but steady. "He's been coming here since before Miss Virgilia got sick. Some say he's the one who made her that way with his powders and poisons." "Why would he do that?" Silas asked lightly, though he already suspected the answer. Esther shot a glance toward the door before answering. "For his experiments. Miss Virgilia wasn't always like this. She started swelling up after the colonel came back from Charleston after studying with Dr. Rutledge's father. Came back with books, equipment, and ideas no man should have. At first she thought it was all for good, curing sickness, cheating death. But she got worse, and he just kept at it. That doctor still comes every few months, brings his boxes, goes straight to the cellar. And others come, 2 white men with fine carriages from Mobile and Montgomery, even Charleston. They go down there before midnight and leave before dawn. And sometimes people go missing. Slaves mostly. The colonel says he sells them, but Marcus swears the sounds from below aren't the sounds of doctoring. Before Silas could reply, Celia appeared in the doorway, her face unreadable. The colonel wants you in the study. The study smelled of tobacco and old paper. Colonel Thornhill stood at the window, his injured arm resting stiffly against his chest. Beside him, Doctor and Rutledge turned as Silas entered, his icy eyes sweeping over him like an appraisal. So this is the specimen, he said, circling Silas. Excellent musculature for his stature. And literate, you say. Read for him, Thornhill ordered. Rutledge plucked a medical text from the shelf, opened it at random, and handed it to Silas. Read aloud. Silas did, his voice calm, precise, pronouncing even the Latin with ease. Rutledge's eyebrows rose. Remarkable? And surgical experience as well. Over 200 procedures, Thornhill confirmed. Rutledge's pale lips curved into a smile. You understand what we're doing here, boy? Silas paused, then replied carefully. The master says you believe vitality can be transferred, that life itself can be shared between bodies. He understands, Rutledge said, his voice almost gleeful. Perfect. Not just a donor, but an observer who can describe what he feels. This will yield invaluable data. Thornhill nodded. Exactly. If there's pain sensation, even visions will document it all. Rutledge turned back to Silas. Tell me, how well do you endure pain? I've been a slave for 31 years, Dr. Silas said evenly. I've learned to endure. Rutledge chuckled. Excellent. You'll need that. What we're attempting has never been achieved, not even by the Society of Medical Inquiry. My father helped found it, and his research guides us still. We're on the brink of a discovery that will change the very meaning of life. He unrolled a large chart across Thornhill's desk. Silas stepped closer despite himself. The drawing showed 2 human figures connected by a web of tubes and needles. Notes in precise handwriting outlined a process combining bloodletting transfusion and strange alchemical rituals timed to lunar phases. We begin with blood extraction, Rutledge said, tracing the diagram with one long finger. But not crude leaching, measured quantities calibrated to body mass and humoral balance. The donor's blood is drawn from the arms and legs, while the recipient receives a tonic of my own design, mercury belladonna, and certain herbs known to open the body's vital channels. Once the body is receptive, we begin the transfer. Blood, yes, but also something deeper. The ancients called it spiritus vitalis, the essence of life itself. And the donor survives, Silas asked. In theory, Rutledge said. Results have varied. Of 7 prior attempts, 3 donors died during the procedure. 2 lingered in weakness and were disposed of. 1 succumbed to fever. 1 survived but went mad, claiming he could feel his soul divided between bodies. He had to be put down. Encouraging odds, Silas said dryly. Thornhill glared, but Rutledge laughed. He's bold, Edmund. I like him. Strong vitality comes with spirit. He turned back to the colonel. We proceed on the new moon 6 days. That's when the vital currents are strongest. Keep him healthy, well-fed, no strain. His body must be at peak condition. And the household silence, Rutledge said. No one sees, no one hears. Only your 2 trusted men at the door. The society expects results, Edmund. If we succeed, this will be the dawn of a new medicine where the young and strong can renew the old and powerful. Imagine it, senators, governors, perhaps even presidents, spared from decay. Thornhill's eyes gleamed. Then we begin in 6 days. Silas bowed and was dismissed. He returned to the kitchen, his face calm though his mind churned. 6 days. He could flee, but his chances of surviving the Alabama woods as a dwarf fugitive were none. He could submit and likely die, or worse. Or he could do what he had done before, wait, watch, and strike when the time was right. That night, he began to prepare. He hid a small kitchen knife under his bed, pocketed a bottle of laudanum from the colonel's study, and began studying the manor like a battlefield. There were 2 ways into the basement, the door near the kitchen, and a hidden passage behind a bookshelf in the colonel's room. The ventilation grate on the north wall might serve as a way out or in. But as Silas listened to the creaking floors above, he realized he wasn't the only one making preparations. On the 3rd night before the procedure, he woke to soft footsteps and saw Celia slipping down the stairs, carrying fresh linens. When she returned an hour later, her face was pale and her hands trembled. The next morning, Silas found her alone in the washhouse. "You saw something," he whispered. She hesitated, glancing around. "I can't say. The colonel will have me whipped. In 3 days I'll be in that basement, Celia," he said quietly. "Whatever you saw, I need to know." Her eyes darted to the door. Then she leaned close, her voice barely a breath. "There are cages down there, Silas," Celia whispered, her voice trembling as though the words themselves might bring punishment. Iron cages built into the walls, and in one of them, there's a man. Or what's left of one. He can't talk. He just stares. His skin, Lord, it ain't right. Cut open and stitched back again over and over. The colonel says he's a failed experiment. Keeps him alive just to see how long he'll last. Silas felt a cold stillness settle over him. "How long has he been there?" "I don't know," she said, shaking her head. "Months, maybe. Maybe longer. But Silas, they're gonna do worse to you. I heard them talking. This isn't about curing Miss Virgilia. This is something else. They call it the ultimate experiment. They talk about it like churchmen talk about salvation, as if it's holy. They'll kill anyone to finish it." Silas said nothing, though his mind raced. If there was already a subject in the basement, it meant Thornhill and Rutledge had long crossed the line from curiosity to cruelty. They weren't scientists. They were predators. "Celia," he said quietly, "if something happens to me, if this goes wrong, you have to tell people what's happening here." She shook her head violently. "Nobody will believe a word from a slave, Silas. And even if they did, the society would protect them. Marcus says they've got members in every big city. Judges, governors, men with power. They cover for each other. They make people disappear." "Then don't talk," Silas murmured. "Just survive." But inside he knew that surviving might not be enough. The truth would die with them unless he found a way to expose it, something undeniable, something even the society couldn't bury. But he had no plan. Not yet. The day of the procedure dawned heavy and gray, the sky swollen with thunder that never came. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Before dawn, Marcus appeared at Silas's door, silent and grim, and escorted him to the basement. The laboratory had changed. More lamps had been brought in, flooding the room with harsh light. 2 tables now stood side by side, joined by a maze of brass pipes, glass tubes, and valves. An unholy machine that looked more like something meant to summon lightning than sustain life. Dr. Rutledge was already there, dressed in a leather apron, stained with old blood, arranging his instruments with almost tender precision. Thornhill stood nearby, leafing through one of his journals. "Ah," Rutledge said without looking up. "Our donor." He gestured to the left-hand table. "Strip to the waist and lie down. Marcus, secure him." Silas complied. The restraints were thick and tight, buckled across his wrists, ankles, and chest. He could move, but barely. 20 minutes later, Virgilia was brought down, her breathing ragged, her massive body trembling with effort. She wore a white gown that made her skin seem almost translucent. Her dark eyes flicked toward Silas, not with sympathy, but with hunger. At last she breathed. "Edmund, are you certain this will work?" "As certain as any man of science can be," Thornhill said. "Dr. Rutledge has improved the process." "And what of him?" she asked, glancing at Silas. "He'll live," Rutledge said, curtly. "Weak for a time, but alive." The indifference in his voice chilled Silas more than any threat. Rutledge moved with mechanical precision, administering laudanum to both of them, just enough to dull the pain, but not enough to make them sleep. Silas felt the slow warmth spread through his limbs as the drug dulled his thoughts. "Heart rate, respiration temperature," Rutledge said briskly. Thornhill took notes like a dutiful student. "Pulse steady at 68, Rutledge continued. "Optimal." "Recipient pulse 92, Thornhill added. "Breathing labored, but stable." "Excellent," Rutledge murmured. "We begin." He dismissed Celia and stationed Marcus and Isaiah at the doors. "No one enters," Thornhill ordered. "If anyone tries, stop them by any means necessary." Their footsteps faded up the stairs. Then it was only Rutledge, Thornhill, Virgilia, and Silas. Rutledge opened one of the unmarked crates. Inside were glass vials filled with shimmering liquids. He chose 3, poured them into a beaker, and stirred slowly. The mixture turned a deep amber color that seemed to glow in the light. "The tonic," he said to no one in particular. "Mercury suspension extract of belladonna and ghostweed, a native plant that opens the boundaries between the physical and the vital. Drink it all, my dear, before the mercury settles." Virgilia obeyed, swallowing it down. Within seconds, her pupils expanded until her eyes looked black and bottomless. Her breathing quickened. "Excellent," Rutledge said, checking his watch. "The channels are open." He turned to Silas. "Now the donor." He selected a scalpel and stepped closer. 4 incisions, he explained calmly, each over a major vessel. Deep enough for flow, shallow enough to preserve you. "You'll feel pain." "Yes," Dr. Silas said softly. "Good. Don't move." The blade bit into the crook of his arm, a flash of agony slicing through the laudanum haze. He gritted his teeth. The second cut burned worse. Blood flowed freely into glass tubes, the crimson liquid swirling through the apparatus. His legs were next. By the time Rutledge reached the 4th incision, the room seemed to sway. Thornhill's voice sounded far away, heart rate 62, 58. 54. "Excellent," Rutledge said. "Drain to 48, then begin the transfusion." Silas watched through a narrowing tunnel of vision as Thornhill turned to Virgilia and opened her arms in matching cuts, shallower, neater. She moaned softly as her blood mixed with the amber tonic. "Her pulse 112, Thornhill said. "Climbing. Perfect. The channels are active." Rutledge adjusted the valves. "Begin the flow." The machine hissed to life. Silas's blood streamed into the system, moving through glass chambers, filled with unidentifiable substances that turned it from red to a strange, shimmering gold. "The purification process," Rutledge murmured. "It strips away the donor's essence. What remains is pure vitality." The golden liquid reached Virgilia's veins. Her back arched, her breathing, frantic sweat beading on her forehead. 120. 128. Thornhill called. Her body's absorbing it. Beautiful, Rutledge whispered. She's receiving the transfer perfectly. 3 pints minimum for measurable effect. Silas felt his consciousness slipping the edges of the room, folding inward. His own heartbeat sounded distant, irregular, as though echoing from another body. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The world dimmed to gold and shadow as his life poured through brass and glass into the waiting body of the woman beside him. The room swayed around Silas, his vision pulsing with each sluggish beat of his heart. The sound was everywhere, slow, heavy, relentless. 40 beats per minute, then 35, then 30. Dr. Thornhill said, a rare note of alarm cutting through his voice, the donor's approaching critical threshold. Just a little more. Rutledge muttered, his tone feverish. We're so close. Another half pint will complete the cycle. He's dying, Thornhill snapped. Then he dies for progress. Rutledge shot back. 30 seconds, Edmund. That's all I need. But Thornhill was already at the valves, twisting them shut. Enough. We stop now, or we lose him completely. We need him for further trials. Rutledge scowled, but after a moment, he relented. The flow stopped. The air filled with the metallic scent of blood and laudanum. Silas felt bandages pressed hard against his limbs, hands forcing thick liquid honey water maybe between his lips, heart rate stabilizing. Thornhill said, watching his pocket watch. 42, 46, 50. He'll live. Good, Rutledge said, turning his attention back to Virgilia. Now we observe the recipient. She lay still, her breathing slowing from ragged gasps to long, deep inhalations. Color was returning to her cheeks, and her eyelids fluttered open. Edmund, she whispered. I feel warmth, like something flowing through me. I feel alive. Rutledge's eyes gleamed as he took her pulse. Remarkable. Pulse 86. Respiration steady, skin tone improving. The integration is holding. How long before we know if it's permanent? Thornhill asked, his voice trembling between awe and greed. Hours, maybe days, Rutledge replied. But Edmund, if this works, we've done what no physician in history has ever achieved. We've moved life from one vessel to another. They celebrated, taking notes and measurements, barely acknowledging Silas as he lay on the table, half conscious, soaked in his own blood. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a mechanism, a vessel, something to be drained, studied, and refilled until he broke. Through the haze of pain and narcotic fog, he listened. He heard them planning, calculating how much could be taken, how often, how far the process could be pushed before it killed him. It was then he finally understood this was never about saving Virgilia. It was about perfecting a process that could make the rich immortal. A system where vitality could be stolen, bought and sold, where the enslaved became not just labor, but life itself. When Marcus and Isaiah eventually carried him upstairs and dumped him on his bed, Silas barely felt the motion. Esther appeared not long after, her face impassive as she spooned broth between his lips and replaced his bandages. Drink, she ordered softly. You need strength. The man in the cage, Silas whispered. How long? Esther's knife hand paused for a moment before resuming its steady rhythm. 9 months, maybe more. He could talk when they first brought him down there. Begged them to stop. Now, he just breathes. They keep him alive with tubes and feedings just enough to keep his heart beating, to see how long the body lasts after it's been emptied. What did they do to him? Things you don't want to imagine, she said flatly. Things no decent soul could dream up. He ain't the first either. 7 before him, all gone, all bought, all buried. Marcus dug the graves himself northfield past the tree line. He don't sleep right no more. None of us do. Silas closed his eyes. He could feel his pulse again, weak, fragile, but alive. 7 before him, each erased without trace. And unless something changed, he'd soon join them, another unmarked grave beneath Alabama clay. He slept, then drifting through fevered dreams of shovels, dark woods, and the vacant stare of the caged man. When he woke, 3 days had passed. His body burned with infection, and Esther's medicine barely kept him from delirium. On the 4th day, he opened his eyes to find Dr. Rutledge standing over him, coldly clinical, examining the wounds like a butcher inspecting cuts of meat. "The infection is resolving," Rutledge said. "He'll regain full function within 2 weeks." And then Thornhill asked from the doorway. "He'll be ready for another procedure within 6, Rutledge replied. The blood loss was significant, but not debilitating. And Virgilia improving rapidly. Edema reduced by nearly half. She's lost 15 pounds. Walked upstairs yesterday for the first time in a year. Thornhill exhaled in satisfaction. Then it worked. Preliminarily, Rutledge said, "But we'll need further transfers to determine optimal frequency." The 2 men left, their voices fading down the hall. Silas lay still, his mind turning over their words like knives. He wasn't a man anymore. He was livestock. A living well of blood to be tapped again and again, until he was nothing but another body in the north field. The door creaked open again, and Celia slipped inside carrying a bowl of soup. She glanced over her shoulder before speaking in a hurried whisper. "Silas, you need your strength. You'll need to move when the time comes." "What time?" he asked weakly. "The time to run. Marcus and I, we've been planning. We've made contact with people who help slaves escape. They call it the Underground Railroad. There are safe houses, routes north. We've been waiting for the right moment. It's coming soon." "Soon, 2 weeks. The Colonel's hosting something, a gathering. Dr. Rutledge said members of the society will be coming to witness a demonstration." Her face went pale. Marcus overheard them. "They're bringing another slave, another dwarf from Montgomery. They plan to perform the procedure again. But this time in front of an audience. They're going to use both of you. A dual transfer." Silas felt the air leave his lungs. 2 donors meant twice the blood, twice the pain, twice the death. He had barely survived once. A second time would kill him. 2 weeks, he said slowly. "I'll be ready." Celia leaned closer. "If we're doing this, we need proof. Testimony won't be enough. We need something real, something they can't deny." "The journal," Silas said. "Locked in his study. Marcus can't get near them. Too risky." "Then we find something better." Silas said, his voice gaining strength. "The man in the cage." Celia froze, her eyes wide. "You can't mean if we can free him," Silas whispered. "If we can get him out. Or even his body, his scars, his face. That's proof no one can bury." The words hung between them, heavy and terrible. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, as if the sky itself was warning them what was to come. If we could free him, bring him north as living proof of what they'd done, no one could ever deny it. No pamphlet, no speech, no plantation myth could hide the truth of a man torn apart and sewn back together in the name of science. Celia shook her head, eyes wide with terror. "He can't walk, Silas. He can't even speak." "Then we'll find a way," he said quietly, but with a resolve that startled even him. "We have 2 weeks. 2 weeks to plan. Because you're right. What's happening here isn't sickness, it's evil. And if we just run, if we save only ourselves, then the 7 who already died will stay buried for nothing." She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Marcus will come tonight. You two can plan together, but Silas, be careful. If they even suspect, they'll kill us all. These men, they've got power and too many important friends protecting them." When she left, Silas forced himself to eat, though the broth turned his stomach. 2 weeks. 14 days to prepare an escape that stood almost no chance of success, but even that was better than the certainty of dying on the table. He thought of the 7 graves behind the north field, marked only by the memory of those who dug them, and he made a promise to himself he'd make sure they were remembered, no matter what it cost. 12 days later, Thornhill Manor was alive with preparation. Word had come that the Society of Medical Inquiry was sending 7 delegates, planters, judges, and physicians, men so wealthy they could afford to hide their crimes behind the veneer of intellectual progress. 3 days before their arrival, a new slave was brought from Montgomery. Silas saw the bill of sale himself. Abel, 26 years old, 4 feet tall, described as docile and healthy. The young man was kept on the top floor, guarded, well-fed, and terrified. Silas caught a glimpse of him, once a round face, wide eyes full of dread, and understood that Abel knew somehow what awaited him. 2 days before the gathering, Silas finally found the opportunity he'd been waiting for. Thornhill sent him to the study to retrieve a medical text, and for the first time in weeks, the room was empty. Silas moved straight to the shelves that held the journal's dozens of leather-bound volumes, arranged neatly by year. He pulled one from 1837, opened it, and felt his stomach twist. Inside were pages of meticulous handwriting and anatomical sketches, each more horrifying than the last. The experiments had started long before Silas arrived. There were numbered subjects, slaves reduced to data points. Notes, detailed incisions, quantities of blood lost, durations of suffering. Some entries recorded deaths after hours of agony. Others described procedures involving organ removal, exposure to toxins, and deliberate infection. Thornhill had been experimenting for at least 5 years, calling it medical progress, though it was nothing more than systematic torture. Silas tucked the journal under his shirt and slipped back to his quarters. There, by candlelight, he read until his eyes burned. Subject 14. Remarkable pain tolerance. Survived 68 hours post-bilateral kidney removal. Subject 19. Resistant to mercury poisoning. Required triple lethal dose. Every word was clinical, detached, as if the victims were livestock. Yet each sentence was proof. Real, undeniable proof that the Society of Medical Inquiry had crossed into something monstrous. Even in a land that enslaved millions, there were limits, and Thornhill had long since passed them. Silas copied key passages onto scraps of paper, memorizing others, then hid them beneath a loose floorboard. He returned the journal before dawn, aligning it precisely where it had been. But the words now lived in his memory. They would be his weapon. By Friday, the guests had begun to arrive, fine carriages rolling up the long drive, voices booming with laughter and anticipation. From the kitchen window, Silas watched them greet Thornhill with handshakes and smiles, the air thick with arrogance. When he later delivered refreshments to the study, he caught sight of the guest list. Dr. Samuel Prendergast from Charleston, the Society's secretary. Judge Horace Levinson from Mobile, known for his reforms. Preston Fairhope, a cotton magnate from Savannah. Dr. Elias Grimsley, professor of anatomy in Richmond. And 3 planters from Mississippi and Louisiana whose wealth made them untouchable. These were not outcasts. They were the South's elite gathered to witness human sacrifice dressed up as science. That night, Thornhill hosted an extravagant dinner. Esther and the kitchen staff worked themselves to exhaustion, preparing dishes fit for royalty. Silas and Marcus served at table silent shadows while the men spoke freely. "I confess skepticism," Judge Levinson said between bites of roasted duck. "Previous transfusion trials have proven universally fatal. What makes yours different?" Edmund. The purification process, Thornhill said proudly, raising his glass. Dr. Rutledge devised it. The donor's blood is treated to remove individual humors, leaving behind pure vitality. The recipient accepts it as life itself. And this can be proven? Asked Dr. Grimsley, his thin lips curling in interest. It already has, Thornhill said. My wife could not walk 3 months ago. Now she dines with us, climbs stairs unaided, and has shed 40 pounds. Her vitality is restored all from a single transfer. At the far end of the table, Virgilia smiled radiant. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. She looked alive in a way that made Silas's skin crawl. Remarkable, said Fairhope, swirling his wine. And tomorrow's demonstration, dual donors, I hear. Correct, Thornhill replied. 2 donors, simultaneous transfer. We predict exponential results. And they survive, asked the judge, arching a brow. At least one should, Rutledge said casually. The other may suffer complications. Acceptable losses, gentlemen. Research demands risk. The laughter that followed chilled Silas to the bone. These men spoke of human beings as if discussing livestock yields. He and Marcus exchanged a brief glance, silent understanding passing between them. After the feast, when the guests retired to smoke cigars and sip brandy, Marcus found Silas in the kitchen. Tomorrow night, he whispered during the demonstration. That's when we go. We can't leave Abel, Silas said immediately. Silas, Marcus sighed. We can't save everyone. If we try to free him during the experiment, we'll die before we reach the stairs. Then we wait until after, when they're distracted when chaos hits. That's when we move. Marcus hesitated, eyes closed in silent conflict. You're asking us to risk everything for a man who might not even live to see morning. Silas's voice was low but steady. I'm asking us to remember that every life matters. That's what separates us from them. A long silence followed before Marcus nodded. Celia's hidden supplies in the smokehouse. There's a wagon 2 miles north on the river road. Midnight departure. 4 hours before they notice we're gone. It's not much, but it's something. And just when it seemed Thornhill Manor couldn't sink any deeper into darkness, the final act was set. Saturday evening brought the kind of suffocating humidity that made even breathing feel like drowning. In the basement, chairs had been arranged in a semicircle around the twin tables. Lamps burned bright, casting the room in cruel surgical light. The guests arrived murmuring with anticipation. Silas and Abel were brought down separately. Abel trembled as Isaiah helped him onto the table, silent tears tracking down his face. The audience leaned forward in fascination. And so began the final experiment, the one that would decide who lived, who died, and whether the truth would ever see daylight. Silas climbed onto the table on his own jaw, tight, thinking only of staying alive and what came next. While the society men settled into their seats like theater-goers, with notebooks ready, Rutledge in his stained apron walking them through the show as Thornhill laid out instruments, saying they would draw life from 2 donors at once for Virgilia, who waited nearby in a white gown with hungry eyes. The plan was 4 cuts on each donor blood through a purifier, then into the recipient, 3 pints per man, 6 total. And when Grimsley asked, what if the donors could not survive that loss, Rutledge said, sacrifice is the price of progress, and then the knives flashed. Abel screamed, Silas bit a strap and kept quiet, pain roaring with every heartbeat while numbers were called out and the lamps seemed to dim at the edges of his sight. And just as the treated blood reached Virgilia, her body bucked hard. Breath, tearing eyes, rolling white. Pulse racing past 140, then 160, while Rutledge insisted it was adjustment, and Thornhill shouted to stop. Too late, her body locked, then went slack. Silence crushed the room. Thornhill begged. Rutledge checked and said she was gone, and chaos broke. gentlemen scrambling for the stairs even as blood still dripped into glass. No one seeing Marcus and Isaiah slip to the tables, bind wounds fast, Celia appear with bundles. Marcus whisper now, and haul Silas up while Isaiah lifted Abel, the four sliding behind a cabinet, to a service door and into a black earth tunnel that smelled of rot. Celia warning they would send dogs and guns. Marcus pushing them on toward the Northfield exit until Silas stopped and rasped the man in the cage, and Marcus cursed, but turned back and came staggering with a weightless figure whose eyes were empty. And they burst into the night air thick with magnolia bells beginning to ring at the manor, then stumbled through woods on hidden paths until a covered wagon waited with Josiah at the reins. A free man who asked nothing and rolled them toward a River Road checkpoint where papers and calm words carried them through, and for 3 long days, safe houses took them in. Abel slowly steadied, the caged man began to focus, and Silas wrote every night copying what he knew and what he had seen. Until that fall, a pamphlet titled Medical Atrocities in the Southern States appeared in Philadelphia, with his testimony, copied pages, and sworn statements from 3 who escaped the Southern press, calling it lies. While Northern papers sent men south who found Thornhill Manor empty. The lab stripped but not clean, and 7 unmarked graves in the North Woods showing cut bones and crude surgery. And though the scandal never fully surfaced below the line, the society quietly folded. A judge left a race, a professor resigned. Rutledge vanished across an ocean, Thornhill fled into rumors. And Silas Abel and the rescued man Samuel reached Canada in winter, where Samuel spoke again for a time and told his story before his ruined body gave out 3 years later, free at last, and Silas kept writing and speaking. So the 7 lost would not stay buried in silence. A promise that outlived him, the rusted instruments dug up in 1923, later set behind glass in a medical museum where they still sit mute and terrible proof that the worst horrors are not ghosts in the dark, but people with power who decide some lives are worth less. And if this tale shook you, tell us what you think, what might still be hidden. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who loves a good mystery.